What is interesting, the idea of technocracy during the idea of the development of this type of concept. It is interesting that the idea of technocracy was born in particular during the ancient Greek society, in particular from some philosophers, in particular two different type of philosophers, the Plato and Aristotle. But this type of idea of technocracy, it was in relation with the idea of competence. This is really interesting because if we have to consider the ancient Greek society, we know that the ancient Greek society was divided in particular between groups as different societies, but at the same time, in relation with the idea of classes. For example, the idea of the aristocrats and the idea of a middle class, and therefore there is a competition also between these type of classes. But in this sense, indirectly, it wasn't a specific type of competition because in the ancient Greek society there was specifically the type of costume that developed the idea that only the aristocrats could have a specific type of privilege. If only aristocrats could have a specific type of privilege because the political power choose this, and therefore the others couldn't have a specific type of competition in front of the aristocrats. Therefore, there is no, in this sense, a sort of competition between classes. And this is interesting because Plato indirectly explained differently from the ancient Greek society that in his republic, therefore, in this dialogue, according to Plato, it is really important that the relation between people had to derive from the competence in relation with competition. According to Plato, the idea of competence and competition are in relation. In fact, in ancient Greek society, in particular in the archaic period, or sometimes in different type of city-states, differently by Athens, in particular from the reform of Clisthenes. In fact, we know that Athens became a democracy after the reform of Clisthenes, after the end of the 6th century BC. We know that in the ancient Greek society, Sparta it was the main example, but there are also different type of examples as Corinth. You could participate. You could participate at the politics only if you could participate at the defense of a territory, and you could participate at the defense of a territory in particular if you was an aristocrat, a part of a group of aristocrats. Therefore, we know that in this sense there isn't a specific type of competition because only the aristocrats could participate at the defense of a territory. Therefore, only the aristocrats could participate at the politics, because to participate at the politics, I repeat, you have to participate. You had to participate at the defense of a territory. But therefore, the idea of competence in politics, it was enclosed in the idea of aristocracy. According to Plato, instead, the idea of competence and competition is different because, according to Plato, the idea of your role in the society, or better in the community, derive from your attitudes and inclinations, and what you explained, what you know from your competence and from your work. This is really interesting because, according to Plato, you can be a philosopher if not necessarily in relation with your class, but you can be a philosopher if you have an attitude to be a philosopher, or at the same time you can be a warrior if you have an attitude to be a warrior, or at the same time you can be a worker if you have an attitude to be a worker. This is really interesting because, therefore, according to Plato, there is specifically the idea that we can consider an individual only in relation with his skills, therefore what he explained with his attitudes. Therefore, in a society that wanted to limit the social competence between the classes, according to Plato, it's not so important the class, it's important your competence in relation with your attitude, and therefore the result, the consequences, what you can develop you with your competence and discipline. This is really interesting because Plato, in this sense, it was the first type of philosopher that, in any case, also developed the idea of education as public education. In fact, in the ancient Athens, as in the ancient Greek society, we know that if you wanted to have a specific type of education, or in a general education, for example, a grammar education, a math education, a rhetoric education or education for the logic, this discipline in relation with the idea of philosophy and rhetoric. You had to consider the possibility, or in particular, your parents had to pay for some sophist or for a public school that it was present into the city states. This is really interesting because according to the ancient Greek society, only the rich people, therefore, or the richest people could send their sons to the schools. At the same time, Plato instead, in the laws and in the republics, theorized a system with a specific type of public school that at the same time had to be educate the boys and girls. Boys and girls, not only boys as the ancient Greek society that considered girls as people that had to stay at home. Boys and girls, in this sense, Plato took from Sparta the idea that also girls have specific type of competence, but in this sense, Plato didn't consider only the possibility that girls had to do the warriors, but at the same time, according to Plato, the girls had to do everything in relation with their attitudes. Therefore, a girl could be a warrior if she has this attitude, but could be also an entrepreneur if she has this attitude, or also a part of a government if she has this attitude. This is really interesting. And at the same time, Plato choose to be open also to the public school, because according to Plato, the school had to instruct the people in relation with their attitude, but also in relation with the new technologies that are discovered. This is really interesting because it's an idea really actual. And in this sense, Plato, for example, it was in relation with a specific type of law, a consuetudinity, a law that it was in relation with the idea of time that consider the attitudes of individuals. In this sense, according to Plato, the school ideally had to find the main attitude of the individual and put him to do the things because, according to Plato, ideally the individual already from his childhood should know what his main attitude. But Aristotle will answer to Plato that we don't know what could be the main attitude of a child in his childhood. Therefore, we have to learn what will be his attitude in relation with his life, and therefore also in relation with different type of causes and effects that this individual will have to live, but also in relation with different type of situation that happen, not because are in relation with our control. This is really interesting because in any case, according to Plato, there is the idea that all is in relation with attitudes according to a hierarchy of attitude, a hierarchy of competence, and therefore a hierarchy of you can do that because you know how to do, but you have to stay to that orders in relation with a specific type of law into a hierarchy of competence because there is a specific type of individual that knows that things better to you. But at the same time, Aristotle answered that specific type of structure has to be considered into a practical life in relation with what we know, in relation with, for example, what we know as social life, social system. Therefore, the two philosophers develop a specific type of connection between them. Plato as social fact to attitudes, and Aristotle to understand that according to the social fact we have to consider that there are some effects that we don't consider. But at the same time, Plato criticized indirectly also Aristotle, because Aristotle, for example, criticized Plato when Plato supported the cause of girls, supported the cause of the female sex. In fact, Aristotle criticized Plato when Plato it was open to the female sex, to the hierarchy of competence. But we know that in this sense, Plato it was open to a free society because Plato supported the two sex. According to Plato, it's not so important. It's not really important your sex. It's important what you know to do. This is really important. The main thing according to Plato, that it is really important in a situation of social life and works. It is important. It's not important your sex. It's not important if you are a woman or a boy or a man, but it is important your skills and your attitudes, your skills, your capacity to understand something and to work for that, to that things that will develop something for you and for the city state as a social system, as a cause that produce an effect for the social system. Therefore, an economic growth in this sense. Yeah, with technologies, with limits in relation with technologies, we know, for example, we know that in that period, a lot of people had to work in the agriculture, but at the same time, according to Plato, there is also a different type of labors, because Plato theorized a sort of different type of labors. There are some people that are much more interested in that type or specific type of market, other people in another type of market. In fact, in the Republic, Plato theorized the possibility for all of people to understand something in relation with their attitude, that it is really important, in relation with their attitudes, that it is really important for the city state, as also different type of skills, as also different type of works that individual had to consider. We know also that in the ancient Greek society, in any case, from the 6th century BC, from the end of the 6th century BC, in any case, the Greeks had already colonized different type of lands, for example, South Italy, for example, Sicily, for example, also the Asia Minor, and new different type of cultures, for example, also the Egyptian. There was already a specific type of market, commerce, exchanges with other cultures. This is really interesting, and therefore we know that in any case Greeks understood that in any case people had specific type of attitudes, skills, etc. This is interesting because the main thing that Thomas Aquinas will rethink in the Christian way, it will be the idea of God that produce attitudes. In fact, according to Plato, attitudes are in relation with soul, and soul is part in a sort of way of the idea of nous as main intelligence that derive from demiurge. Therefore, we have an attitude because we have a soul into a body, but our soul is a part of a main intelligence that derived from the main thing that assembles things, that it is a demiurge, therefore God. Aquinas, in the Middle Ages, it will rethink this type of argument, rethinking this argument in the idea of a Christian God that derived from this Christian God different type of multiple types of thinkings and attitudes of people. This is really interesting because in any case, the idea of in any case genetics, the genetic and attitudes, it was developed from the ancient Greek society, from Plato. We know that he didn't have this specific type of idea of genetic, but at the same time, indirectly Plato, with his intelligence and with the idea of God, rethinking this in the idea of attitudes. Therefore, indirectly, as in our modern age, as a possibility to have a genetic, because if each people has different type of soul in relation with attitudes, and you have a specific type of capacity, skills that the others cannot have because they have another type of attitude, we are speaking about genetic in this sense. And this is really interesting. And also, not only genetics, but also in relation with the impact that the environment has to you. This is the other argument that Plato developed already in the ancient Greek society, and the Aquinas rethinking in the Middle Ages. Bye.